help you describe patterns and trends in data using SPQE structure. So what is SPQE? Firstly, it's a writing structure that helps you describe patterns and trends in data effectively. It is very similar to how you would use the Peel structure to help you write paragraphs in English and other subjects. So SPQE is a geography equivalent for explaining patterns in data or describing patterns in data. So to describe patterns and trends means that you're providing an overview of what the data means or what the data says is happening. So you're essentially telling the story of what the data is saying. If you are looking at a map, then you'll be describing a pattern, and if you're looking at a graph, we would call that a trend. So here is the overall structure, SPQE. The first step for the S is you want to state what the data is about. This just tells us what the map is literally looking at. So what is the data about, where is it about, when is it about? And to get this information, you can look at information on the map, such as the title, the key, and also the figure label, where it says figure 1, map of blah, blah, blah. Next, you want to identify the pattern. So in one sentence, identify the overall pattern or trend in the data and give a bit more detail to actually characterize that trend. So for example, is the data increasing rapidly? Is it increasing exponentially? Give a little bit of a description. To quantify means that you are then referring to the data to actually demonstrate that pattern or trend. Point to the evidence to show me that that is the pattern or trend. And it's really good if you can refer to 2 examples of data to strengthen. It basically provides more evidence. Then you want to identify exceptions. So an exception is when there is something that doesn't quite fit the pattern. So identify one anomaly that does not fit that observed pattern or trend, and then briefly just describe why this is considered an anomaly. As in, why is this unexpected? Why does it not fit the overall trend? You do not need to explain the reason for the pattern or explain the reason for the exception at all. It's asking you to describe what the data is doing. So that's the overall structure, and whether you are describing a map or a graph, you will follow the same steps. So here's an example of describing patterns and maps, and then we'll do graphs after. At the very end, I will also give a few tips. So if you are just looking about some map help, then skip to the end for a few more tips. Okay, so the first step is, well, firstly, we have a map here of India, and it's showing, as we can see in the key, their GSDP in rupees from 1999 to 2000, and the flows of people, and the figure says the relationship between the movement of people and wealth indicated by GSDP of the states they are moving to and from. GSDP is the gross state domestic product, which is a measure of the size and health of the economy of that particular state. So, step 1, state what the map is about. Looking at the key, or looking at this information here, I can write one sentence saying figure 3 shows the GSDP and flows of people in India in the year 2000, or 1999 to 2000. Very simple. Next step, in a new sentence, identify the overall pattern. So I can have a look at the data, and this is where you want to take your time to really have a look at what's going on, especially with a map like this where there's arrows. It can seem a little bit overwhelming. So I would firstly look at where are most arrows going into and where are most arrows leaving, then have a look at the key and see, is there a pattern we can spot? Now I can see a lot of arrows are going into the darker coloured states, which show the higher GSDP, and a lot of arrows are leaving the lighter coloured ones, which show the states with a lower GSDP, and they're generally going into the higher GSDP states. So we can see that there. So here is my sentence. The main migration flow of people is from states with a low GSDP to states with a high GSDP. Now I need to refer to data to actually demonstrate that pattern. So I will read this and then I'll explain why I picked that. For example, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar both have a low GSDP, less than 10,000 rupees, and have the highest out-migration. It is most common for people from these states to migrate to wealthier states such as Maharashtra or Haryana, which have a GSDP of 20,000 to 29,999 rupees. The largest migration flow, consisting of 503,000 people, was from Uttar Pradesh, low GSDP, to Maharashtra, high GSDP. So what I've done here is I needed to prove that most people are moving from low GSDP states into high GSDP states. So I did this by, first of all, looking at these areas that have the highest outmigration that are also low GSDP states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. How do I know that they're a low GSDP state? Because they have less than 10,000 rupees. And they have the highest outmigration, either the most arrows coming out of it or a number of thick arrows. Where are they? So I'm sorry, by doing that, I have shown that there's a lot of people leaving the lower GSDP states. Now I need to say where they're going to, and they are generally going to states with higher GSDPs, such as Maharashtra or Haryana. How do I know that they are high GSDP states? Because looking at the key, they have 20,000 to 29,999 rupees. So that is now showing that generally the pattern is that these low GSDP states are moving to higher. I finished off my last sentence here giving a particular example. So I can see this really big arrow which shows the biggest or the largest movement of people, and that is 503,000 people moving from Uttar Pradesh, low GSDP, into Maharashtra, a high GSDP state. And so by showing that, I have clearly demonstrated my pattern. Last, I need to identify an exception to this pattern. To do this, I need to think about my main pattern is that most migrants are moving from lower GSDP states to high GSDP states. And now I'm looking for any examples that don't follow this pattern. So are there examples of high GSDP states moving to low GSDP states? There's an example here, there's an example here, but there's also a better example because there's a larger migration from Maharashtra into Gujarat. So I might use that example. There could be multiple examples, but pick the one that is the best exception. So although the migration from low to high GSDP states was the most common pattern, there were a few anomalies such as the migration of 100,000 to 224,999 people from Maharashtra, high GSDP, to Gujarat, lower GSDP. So in that first sentence, I identified what the data shows, where it's about and when it's about. I identified the overall pattern. I then gave some clear examples to show the pattern. So I've shown that most migrants are leaving low GSDP. I have referred to data to show that it's a low GSDP state. I have shown that these low GSDP state migrants are moving to higher GSDP states. And I have also pointed to a really big example to demonstrate that. In my exception, I acknowledged the general pattern, but then I also identified the anomaly that people moving from high to low GSDP. And then I gave a particular example being Maharashtra having 100,000 to 224,999 migrants moving to Gujarat. Okay, now looking at graphs. Here we have a graph showing the population of Dashinganling. Sorry, I should have checked the pronunciation before. From 2010 to 2022. So first part, what is a graph about? Figure 1 shows Dashinganling's population from 2010 to 2022. The overall trend, it is decreasing. So it could be increasing, decreasing, or plateauing, but this is clearly decreasing overall. When you are looking at the overall trend, don't worry if there are some fluctuations. So some years might be high and then low and then high and then low. As long as you're looking at the overall, what is generally happening, what is the biggest differences from earlier years to more recent years, if that's the main change, that it has decreased, then that is the trend. So Dashinganling's population demonstrates a steadily decreasing trend over time from 2010 to 2012. Now refer to data to demonstrate this trend. So I like to look at the earliest year. Here the population was very high, and over here the population is significantly lower in 2022. So if I compare this year to this year, I can show that pattern. So in 2010 the population was 520,000 people and decreased to 388,327 by 2022. If I want to bump this up, I might do a calculation to really quantify that to make the difference clear to people. This is a decline of 131,673 people in 12 years. So that involves a little bit of math, but I think it makes the point very clear about how many people it decreased by in how much time. Lastly, identifying exceptions to the trend. Now, there is no obvious random increase. If there was a random year like 2016 that was a bit higher, that would be a really obvious anomaly, but in this example, it is pretty much always decreasing. So sometimes you might look at the rate of the change, and that could be an exception. So here, it's a bit of a slower decrease, and then here it starts to speed up. So from 2010 to 2000 and roughly 14, it's a bit slower. From 2014 onwards, it's much faster. Over time, the population consistently decreases. However, the rate of decline varies, with a slower decline occurring from 2010 to 2014 and a faster rate from 2014 to 2022. Again, I identified the what, the when, the where. I identified the overall trend and that it's decreasing, and I gave some extra details such as the rate of decrease and also when it decreased, like when the years. In the quantify section, I referred to two examples. I referred to 2010 and 2022 and showed that in this year it was higher and this year it was lower. I used the correct units of measurement, so how we're talking about 520,000 people. And I bumped it up by calculating the overall difference in population to make that trend much more clear for people. In the exception section, I acknowledged that the trend was that it was consistently decreasing, but then I identified that the exception is that the rate of decline was varying, and I referred to data to demonstrate that anomaly, saying that it was a slower decline from 2010 to 14, but then faster from 2014 onwards. So a few other tips. Remember the SPQE structure. You are not necessarily always going to have that structure and scaffold given to you, so make sure you can remember those 4 steps and what you need to do as part of them. When using data, always remember to use the units of measurement, whether it's rupees, dollars, migrants. It could be people. It could be years. Whatever it is, make sure you use the units of measurement. Use appropriate geographic terminology throughout. The next page, I will give you some ideas. So for general SPQE, words like pattern, trend, increase, decrease, plateau, gradually, steadily, rapidly, exponentially. The correct units of measurements. Anomaly, exception. For this unit specifically about urbanization and migration, you might consider using words like this. It depends. Also look at whatever is on the map too. Something else I wanted to mention as well as a general tip that I forgot to include, when you write your paragraph, you do not need to write a big essay. It is simply 4 to 6 sentences. So going back, so let's go all the way back. 1 sentence for S, 1 sentence for P. Quantify is where it might get a little bit bigger. It could be 2 or 3, depends how you write. And exception could be 1 or 2. So you don't need to write heaps. Anyway, that is an explanation of how to write an SPQE paragraph for maps and graphs, and I hope you found it helpful.